you know that I was born during the war. And recalling those earliest years of my life, I can remember conversations between my father and other people, especially some of the other men in the neighborhood, and conversations between my parents about, we need tires, but you can't get any. Now, some of you who are old enough to remember back or know enough about what happened during those war years, things were rationed. And sometimes they were rationed to the point you couldn't get them. And I remember my father telling a neighbor 2 or 3 doors away, telling that, man, do you have, anybody that's got some old tires to fit my little Crosby? I've got it up on blocks. But I can't go anywhere because I can't get a tire. Can't get tires. Tires were very closely and strictly rationed during the war effort. I remember the only transportation my family had was my father's 5-ton truck. That the whole bed of the truck was to carry soft drinks, cases of soft drinks. It was a 5-ton truck and it had 5 tons of soda pop on it. And it was not the most comfortable ride, let me tell you. If my mother needed to go to town and shop or whatever, and my father was going to get us there, I was the firstborn. This is the way it worked. My dad would park the drink truck out in our front yard. Why? Why didn't he park in the driveway? Well, because the truck was wider than the driveway. And anyhow, we're going to go to town and we're going to shop. My dad is at the steering wheel, and the gear shift is a floor-mounted. Okay? Anybody old enough to remember those good old days? And this truck, being a 5-ton truck, had a grandpa gear or granddaddy gear or whatever you call it. A low. And of course, most of the time you just bypass the low. You didn't shift down there because when the light changed or you could go from the stop sign, it was and just go a few feet and then on. So if you weren't loaded, you didn't use the grandpa gear. You didn't use low. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Now that depended on whether or not my father had the truck loaded out before he came home for the weekend or whatever, for the evening. If the truck was loaded out, you used the grandpa gear. You got that load, you got that weight, you got, And my father's driving, and I'm sitting in the middle. I'm the young'un. I'm sitting in the middle, and I'm straddling the gear shift. Now, ordinarily, if you're not using low, there's not a problem. But if my father has to go through all the gears, including granddaddy low, okay, then I have to shift when my father shifts to make it possible to go through all the gears. And my mother's over here, and we're going to town. And that town was 3 to 5 miles away, and there was the grocery store, the A&P market, and all of this kind of thing. Now, you would not think that 3 to 5 miles would be a problem. But when you're in low gear, it can take you 30 minutes to go 3 to 5 miles, depending on the traffic. So I want you to kind of get the picture of when I was growing up, and the only transportation my family had for several years of my early years of life was a 5-ton truck And this little Crosley, which wouldn't run, couldn't go, and was up on blocks because couldn't get tires. The war ended in 1945. And the end of the war stranded several million young American men on that side of the world, and they were still trying to come home from the other side of the world, from the war with Germany on this side and the war with Japan on that side. So you had several million, not thousands, million young American men who are going to come home. Where are they going to work? Well, that's not a problem. We've got 1,000 factories and they're working day and night. Yes, but what are they making? They're making guns, they're making planes, they're making ships, they're making bullets, they're making whatever and what. But we're not going to use that anymore. We don't need to make that anymore. So the first 2 or 3 years that the war was over was a real struggle for the leaders of the United States and the other countries too, but a real struggle to try and get these men back home, back to their families if they lived through the war. And what are they going to do? I remember very clearly the little neighborhood we lived in, and I remember these men coming home. If the folks had an automobile in their family, the horns would be blowing and the neighbors would be outside to welcome Billy home and Doug home and John home and whatever. People had to make a show of Daddy is back, son is back. And most of the folk didn't have transportation, if any at all. And they certainly didn't own decent transportation. You've got to rework the whole manufacturing effort of the country, from making tanks and guns to starting to make automobiles again. It took from 1945 to 1952 and 53 for my family, my father, my mother, my family. It took from 1945 to 1952, 53 for my family to have the first opportunity, absolutely the first opportunity after the war. What is that, 7 years, 7+ years? For my family to be in a line to buy an automobile. And you had to go in and get your name in the line.
Different day today, isn't it?
I can remember the day my father came home, not in a 5-ton truck, but in a brand new 1953 Plymouth. Brand new. The first and only new vehicle my family owned before my parents passed away. Now, because everything was a struggle and an effort to get life back to normal, our 1953 brand spanking new from the factory Plymouth didn't have a heater in it, Patty. And all is well until winter arrives. We had no heater. And it was very uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. And so my father had to make arrangements with the dealer to take the car back in and have a heater installed. You had to pay extra for a heater. Remember those good old days?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I don't remember. I don't remember. Now that's 1953 Plymouth. I'm moving from my infancy years to my preteen years, and something happened in 1955-56. Something happened in my life experience. I was in school, 7th grade, 8th grade, and I was in the Seventh-day Adventist school in Birmingham, in West End. And I finished the 8th grade. And that's as high as Brakeworth Junior Academy went. You couldn't go past the 8th grade. They didn't have 9, 10, 11, 12 grades. You had to go away somewhere to academy or go to public school or whatever. So I am in the 8th grade, and I am going to be graduating from the 8th grade. And the teacher or someone, the principal, someone came into the classroom and announced to our giant class of 15, announced that something special was being planned for the graduates. This was going to be a present to the graduates. So let me back up and tell you about my father's 5-ton truck and what he carried on the truck. You could hear my dad coming a long time before he got home. You could hear him. You could hear the gears. But you could hear thousands of bottles on this truck. You could hear the glass bottles. Every little jiggle. It was going to be a very new and different experience to get out of that monster truck and get into something else. Well, I left something out of the story, and what I left out of the story was between the end of the war and the new 1953 Plymouth, there were these ancient of days used vehicles that were beginning to surface here and there and whatever. And one afternoon my father came home, not in the 5-ton truck, but in a 5-ton Kaiser. It weighed nearly 5 tons. The fenders were that thick of metal. And this thing looked like a tank, literally looked like a tank coming your direction. We had a brief period of time in which we had a used vehicle to ride around in. And the neighbors were trying to do the same thing. Transportation was not easily found, easily afforded. And so when the neighbors saw the 5-ton Kaiser pull into the driveway, Herschel found another car somewhere, found another vehicle. But when my dad came home in a brand new 1953 Plymouth, sky blue, and parked it in the driveway, we were surrounded with neighbors who had to come see this new vehicle. Now, as a youngster, when I went over on the passenger side to climb in and sit on that front seat and smell that new car, that was as close to heaven as you could get. No one that I can recall, no one in the community we lived in, and there were several hundred homes in this subdivision, no one in this community owned a Cadillac. As a matter of fact, just to get a new vehicle was everybody in the neighborhood has to come see it, feel it, touch it, open the doors, look in the trunk, look under the hood. I mean, this is a big deal. Because they had been without and been without and been without for so long. As a youth, I had heard about Cadillacs. The best Cadillacs. And the only Cadillacs I ever saw were in an advertisement in a magazine somewhere. The Cadillac brand, the Cadillac vehicle, whatever. And so the ads would say something like this: drive the best. Nothing but the best. And here I am in 1955, 56, and I'm graduating from the 8th grade. and it's announced that there is something special being planned for you graduates. The Sharp family is inviting the entire class of 15. The Sharp family is inviting the entire graduating class to come spend a week with them in their home on the beach in Panama City, Florida. Man, visions of sugar plum fairies are dancing in your head. This has to be something great. And it was. So before I get to the Cadillac, let me tell you about the Sharp family. The husband was Grady Sharp. It was the Sharp family. And the wife was Margaret. And Grady and Margaret were good business people. They were sharp business people. And they had prospered during the war years. Wait a minute, I thought that was tough on that. If you were in a business that dealt in sugar stuff, you were in business. This is why my father could get tires for that ugly 5-ton truck when nobody else could get tires. Because he was hauling sugar water around. And Grady and Margaret Sharp prospered in those years because they were selling sugar cookies. And then I had Larry Benjamin tell me about the experience of his family during the war. And my daddy had a bakery and he made pies and cakes. And man, we really were on easy street. So how is it that the people who are dealing in sugar are prospering? Because the federal government, knowing that the morale of the people at home was extremely important, they had to prop up the morale of the people at home while their sons and fathers are away and may never return. And it was done with cakes and pies and cookies and sugar drinks and whatever. It was done with sugar. So which came first, tires for the 5-ton truck or sugar? They came together. I'm telling you this because Grady and Margaret Sharp, being in the sugar business, prospered. And they had built up a brand name during the war years. And so they were still prospering. And when it was announced that Grady and Margaret Sharp, the wealthiest family in the church, is sponsoring the 8th grade, and we're going down to the beach, it was a big deal. Let me tell you, it was a big deal. Now, before I tell you about the Cadillac, I've got to remind you that in 1955-56, there was not even a hint. There was never any discussion of interstate highways. Those were the wonderful days of this lane and this lane on the same single road, highway. A lot of people died. A lot of people. All you needed was for the car coming at you to just stray across the line a little bit, and it was a head-on. And not only that, there were no decent highways, and so you had to take the back roads that during the war years were neglected because so much of effort and money was put into the war effort. To get from Birmingham, Alabama to Panama City, Florida was not a picnic. It was here, it was there, it was here, it was there, it was bump, it was pothole, it was over the railroad tracks. It was. Now, I didn't know that. As a youngster, I didn't know the condition of the roads or even the roads we were going to take to get to Panama City. But here we were, 15 in the class, the teacher, the Sharps, everybody who's going to be part of this wonderful, wonderful gift are standing there, and Grady, who was he was an imposing person. Grady is looking around, and he turns and looks at me, and he says, "You're riding with me." I didn't know what that meant. Not yet. And he chose one other person. "You're riding with me. I'm taking two of you in the car with me." Well, it just so happens that Grady Sharp had just stopped off at the Cadillac dealer and picked up his brand spanking new Cadillac. I didn't even have to die to go to heaven. Are you listening? I'm telling you a real life experience. I mean, real. Just to sit in the back seat behind Grady, who was driving, was an incredible, first ever in my life experience. I didn't just touch a Cadillac. I was riding in a Cadillac. And I could move around in that roomy back seat, and I could look over Grady's shoulder, and I could look at the dash, and I could see this, and I could, oh man. And I'll tell you something else. I don't care how many potholes there were. I never fell to one of them. I cannot recall a single pothole in that journey. I can't recall exactly, but it's probably the first time in my life I understood that God drives a Cadillac. Everything God does is the best. Surely He owns a Cadillac. Probably owns a fleet of them. Now you may be wondering, what is the spiritual experience in all of this? What does this have to do with anything? I would have to grow up a few years, and I would have to read the Word with a larger understanding. And it opens with, and God saw everything that He had made, and it was Cadillac. It was not just Cadillac, it was very Cadillac. It was the best. Now, at first, there was no struggle in that for me. No emotional, no mental, no spiritual struggle in that until I could mature some in life. And I could see that nobody else, or very few people, not only didn't own a Cadillac, didn't drive a Cadillac, but never even had the opportunity to sit in the back seat of one. And so in my youthfulness, I had to begin to wonder, why does God get to ride in a Cadillac and everybody down here is dirt poor? Now maybe you don't know what dirt poor means. But in those earliest years of my life, I saw, I smelled, I knew what dirt poor meant. Not because my family was dirt poor, but because we lived on this side of the street and the black community lived on that side of the street, and everybody on that side was dirt poor. You would have to live through the experience to understand what I'm talking about, but the black community was not just poor, they were dirt poor. And if a person is dirt poor, they have to do something in life. Somewhere there has to be a leveling. Something has to be done for the psyche to handle it. And so in my youthful years, I wondered why, if the people we knew over in the black community just across the road, if they had a job and earned a little bit of money, and they wanted transportation. Why would these black fellas, known to us, why would they go and buy a Cadillac? Not a new one, a used one. And it didn't matter if it looked like it came out of the war with 15 bullet holes in it. They were driving a Cadillac. Was that a psychological thing? Oh, absolutely. No question about it. I'm going to make a statement. So you have to grow up. You have to see life. You have to experience life. You have to experience it not only through your own eyes and experiences, but through others. And you have to recognize that everybody on this rock wants to drive a Cadillac. Everybody. We had a good friend, passed away several years ago, fabulous preacher. You could ask Elder Hoffman, what kind of car you drive? Now that was a get him started question, you know. Elder Hoffman, what kind of car? I drive the only automobile mentioned in the Bible. And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. Now he would take great delight in saying, I drive the only car mentioned in the Bible. And if you are not really back a few years and understand that the Accord was the top of the line in the Hondaville, all right? Everybody on this rock wants to drive and even ride in a Cadillac. I want to remind every one of us this morning that that was God's original plan. There was never a Plymouth mentioned in the Bible. Never a Kaiser. You could say, well, there's never mentioned a Cadillac. Oh, yes, there is. Yes, there is. Everything, Old Testament and New Testament, just screams at us that what we're experiencing down here, what we're living through and passing through down here, is not the original plan. If God can make one Cadillac, He can make zillions of Cadillacs. And that was the difficulty. How is it that God rides in a Cadillac and He doesn't just drive a Cadillac? God doesn't drive. He has chauffeurs. Everything at His beck and call. And from our perspective down here, that can be tough to live with, folks. David got there once in his life. He said, Lord, I'm writing a psalm down here. I can't contain myself any longer. I want to know, why do the wicked prosper? Once we come to grips with God's first plan, was that everyone should drive a Cadillac, own a Cadillac, ride in a Cadillac. That was the plan. Well, it's not working out. Why is it not working out? Because a couple of folk back there in the garden decided there was something better than a Cadillac. I don't know what it would be. They decided there is something better than the best. They were doing what they thought was best? No. They were doing what they wanted. They were yielding to temptation. Judy and I have owned a couple of Cadillacs in our lives. One of them we paid $3,500 for, and the other one we paid $10,000 for. We look rich coming down the road. Now the question is, on what basis did you, as a humble preacher on a humble preacher's salary, decide you were going to ride in a Cadillac? You've got something wrong with you, boy. So when I was in college, my professor, was fresh over from Germany. He's a very bright fellow. And when in my junior and senior years I had to choose between Hebrew or Greek, I chose the Greek New Testament. I was required to take 2 years of Greek, Koine Hebrew, not Hebrew, but Koine Greek New Testament. This German professor, very bright fellow, was to be my teacher, my instructor in learning Greek. So one day in class, he decided to forget the lesson in Greek and tell us, the class, share with us an experience that he and his wife had firsthand when they were first over here from Germany. And he was to be a junior pastor somewhere up in Virginia, somewhere up in that part of the country. He was to be a junior pastor, and he was to go out into a district that had 2 or 3 churches, and start at ground level. And so they came over here to America, and you got to have transportation. And being German, why, they were going to drive a German vehicle. You have to understand. Nothing but the best. And so they bought a brand new Volkswagen Beetle. Now, it never occurred to them that the color they chose was a problem. I mean, it beats walking every day of the week. And so on this very first Sabbath, they drove up to the church in their brand new red Volkswagen. Oh, if you are a pastor, you don't want to be flashy. Oh, if you're a pastor, you know better than this. So here these 2 innocents step out of their Volkswagen, their ritzy Volkswagen. They step out of their car at church, and the head elder comes up and says, red, the color of Rome, and turned around and walked off. Ain't life grand? Aren't people wonderful? Don't you just want to witness? Don't you want to just say good things all the time about all things and all people? Don't you wish life was a Cadillac? We live in a world that is so far away from the best. I get up in the morning, I'm thinking of my health, and I go to the faucet and I get a glass of warm water to flush my system. And my wife comes down the stairs and she says, "No! Don't do that." What's wrong? That's city water. That's got chlorine in it. That's got fluorine in it. That's got whatever in it. That's not the best. You want the best. And she's right. She's right. I know. I would live longer. I would do better if I wouldn't imbibe these poisons. I understand. But somewhere in 74 years of the Christian journey, I read the Gospels, and Jesus healed lots of people. Some by distance, long distance, just some by touching, some by whatever. Jesus healed a lot of people. But they're all dead now. So what lesson is there to be learned in all of these Cadillac and Volkswagen stories? So here we are. The New Testament touches upon this principle. Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest drive a Cadillac and be in good health. That was the original plan. God never intended for you and me to drive through potholes down here. Never. Never. God's original plan, I didn't even have to put gas in the tank. It's a long, long way from a brand new, just picked it up at the dealer and lets me sit in the back seat and smell brand new Cadillac for 300 miles. We're a long way from Cadillacville, you and I. A long way. And by the way, if you do get a Cadillac and it breaks down, you pay Cadillac prices. God's original purpose and plan was that everything should be the best. The best. Nothing but the best. And then everything went wrong. No, everything didn't go wrong. But the people who were given ownership, rulership, controlship over this rock went wrong. They decided, whether they understood what they were deciding or not is not the issue. They decided that there was something better than God's plan. And that's all that's necessary. It doesn't matter if it happened on this rock or that rock over yonder or that one out yonder or another one across the cosmos. It doesn't matter. If someone anywhere in God's plan steps out of the plan, how far did that simple decision, and it was just a simple choice and decision in the garden, how far has that ride taken us? Now the question is, could God, who created everything, is it possible that God not only created everything, but is required to always be in the picture to uphold and sustain everything that He's created? Yeah. So there's never a moment from the instant of creation to whatever in eternity to come. There is never a moment that God can step out of the picture. Because if He does, Cadillacs get rusty and worn out. People get rusty and worn out. Just ask June. You and I have never set ourselves in the back seat of a Cadillac. I'm talking about the real Cadillac. I mean, you and I have never even smelled it, much less taken a ride in it. We have no real experience down here, you and I, in Cadillac living. And because there is something within us, something tells every one of us there's something better than this life. There is something better than this plan. There is something better than what's going on down here. There is something better. And so the question is, how do you get it? Well, Jesus had parable after parable about how some people go about getting a Cadillac. You can build bigger barns, and you can do this, and you can do that. And then Jesus said, "You fool, don't you understand you're going to be dead tonight?" We all want something better than this life offers. Now the question is, how do you get to ride in a Cadillac? So here we are on this planet, on this rock, and here's Buddhism. Buddhism is a ride. You can take a ride in Buddhism if you want. You can take a ride in several different automobiles or vehicles down here. You really need to shop around. Some people have decided they're going to ride in a Christian automobile. That's the one I'm choosing to ride in. Sometimes people wind up riding in the Christian auto and don't really understand the difference between that one and a Muslim automobile and a Buddhist automobile and a whatever and a whatever and whatever. But we need to be shopping around down here. Just like buying a vehicle. You're choosing a religion. You're choosing a ride. That's the simplest way I know how to put it. You're choosing your ride-along experience. Okay, so I'm choosing Christianity. I think that's the best vehicle out there that I can own. I'm choosing the Christian experience. Well, on what basis am I choosing the Christian experience? I'm choosing the Christian experience because no more potholes. I'm choosing the Christian way because I get extra miles to the gallon. I'm choosing. And so selfishness can come into this picture and does come into this picture. Started in selfishness in the first place. How do you reduce life to choosing an automobile? It's really very simple. If you're going to take a trip, if you're going to take a long jaunt, and that may be 60 years or 70 years or 80, whatever years you live down here, if you're going to take a long trip, what you want is comfort. What you want is space, not... What you want is comfort. That's what you want. You want, insofar as it is possible, you want the best. Now I have a question for you in all of this Cadillac, Volkswagen talk. I have a question for you. Do you think it matters to God about how uncomfortable the ride is down here? Do you think God concerns himself with potholes? Do you think God concerns himself with those folk on this side of the road? They're a bit more prosperous than the folk on this side of the road. Do you think God concerns himself? Well, that's just the way it is. No, that is the way it is, but that's not the way it's supposed to be. That is not the original best plan. And so what God is promising us all through this book and all through our days down here is, don't give up. Hold on. I know it's tough. Be patient, because I have a plan. Now tell me what the plan is. Come on. What's the plan? I'm coming to pick you up in my Cadillac. That thought actually occurred to me when Grady Sharp says, "You're riding with me." I didn't know whether to say Yahoo, jump up and down, or whatever, because he had just parked that brand spanking new Cadillac right over there. It was a honey. I mean, this thing was so advanced. If a car was coming toward you on the highway at night, you didn't even have to blink your lights. It had an automatic blinker on it. I feel, whether I am or not, I feel impoverished in this life. I feel as though I deserve better than this. And so do you. We all deserve better than what we are being served up. All. And you have to read the Bible and read the Bible and read the Bible, and you have to live a few years to come to understand what God is saying when he says, I'm telling you through my prophet, all that the cankerworm hath eaten, I will what? I will repay. Just that simple verse of Scripture tells me that God knows what we're going through down here. God knows. And he knows that it's not a picnic. And He knows that you and I need desperately to know that He is promising that it's not always going to be this way. There's a day coming. May I go so far as to say, there's a Cadillac right ahead. There is indeed. All of this sounds very selfish. No. I don't think it's selfish to say or even think that you and I deserve better than this. I'm sorry, I just don't think that's selfish. I think that's common sense. Now the question for all of us down here is, how are we going to go about getting there? Am I going to go steal a Cadillac from my neighbor down the street? Am I going to go sell drugs on the side so I can go buy a new Cadillac? What am I going to do about the situation? Or am I going to trust? Did you hear what Jesus said when the disciples, and I think it was Peter, but I'm sure there were others standing around? Lord, we've sold everything we got to follow you. What are we going to get for it? That's in the gospel. Lord, we've done this. We've sold houses and boats and nets and whatever we've left. What are we going to get for all of this? Now tell me what Jesus said. What?
100-fold in this life and eternal life.
No man
Who's left father or mother or whoever,
who has given up something in this life for me, for the cause, no man is going to experience loss. I will see to it that you will receive some payment in this life, but 100-fold in the life to come.
I said 100-fold in this life
Yeah,
and eternal life.
yeah. I'm waiting on the 100-fold down here. I think that's a spiritual 100-fold down here. I think it's spiritual and material up there. The point I want to get across to all of us is, God knows our circumstances down here. God knows that we are not riding in comfortable down here. God knows that. And the great temptation is that, well, God could correct all of this right now and give me a smooth ride. But guess who's riding with us? God is riding with us. So God is not asking you and me to ride in a junker down here. What He is telling us again and again and again is, I am with you the whole way, even to the end of the world. I am riding with you. I'm not telling you to go take all the lumps and bumps alone. I'm telling you, I'm with you. And that has to do something to the mind and the heart. That has to do something. And it has to say, this is a God I want to serve. I may be tempted to say I want to serve Him because He drives a Cadillac and He rides in Cadillacs and He can make Cadillacs and He can do Cadillacs and I may be tempted to follow Him and want Him and desire Him because He rides in the best. But somewhere, sometime, it has to break upon my mind and my thinking and my heart that God who deserves, God who owns, God who has, God who can make Cadillacs, God who can do anything and everything, left His Cadillac parked in heaven and came down here. That is a spiritual reality. That is a spiritual truth. For God so loved the world, He left His Cadillac parked up there and came down here. There are many reasons to follow Jesus. Many reasons. I guess we could say one reason is He drives a Cadillac. No, Jesus doesn't. His father has the Cadillac parked up there. Jesus came down here, and from the moment he was born, there was no new car smell. It was manure. There was no easy street. From the moment he was born, there were plots against his life to kill him before he could even take his first step and walk. We have to understand that the choice that was made back there in the garden hurt not only themselves, it was going to cost their offspring dearly. And I cannot help but reason that Cain killed Abel out of anger, out of just, I don't know why I'm having to pay for what my mom and dad did. I've done the best I can do. I'm bringing the best of my orchard and my garden, and it's not good enough. And my kid brother shows up and he gets all of the... Is this story told over and over and over again in the Bible? Is there a young son that goes off and drinking Playingville, and the elder brother stays home and minds business, and he doesn't get a robe, and he doesn't get a ring, and he doesn't get a party, and he doesn't. I mean, a Cadillac can evoke all kinds of ideas and memories and thoughts and temptations and whatever. And trying to sort out life down here is a challenge for all of us. You have to understand that a person who came into this life and never was exposed by godly parents or grandparents or whatever, never was exposed in their early years and in their growing up years, was never exposed to the Bible. No one ever really quoted Scripture to them. And they are confronted day in and day out with life down here and the potholes down here. And is it asking more than we can ask to say, you should love God? You should serve God. They don't even know who God is, much less know what He is all about and what His promised plan is. They don't know. I'll sum it up this way. This is going to be strictly personal. This is my belief, and it may be correct and it may not be correct. Doesn't matter. This is what I believe right now. I believe that on the resurrection morning, there are going to be millions, and I'm talking about the first resurrection. I believe there are going to be millions and millions and millions of people who have lived on this rock and died on this rock. I believe there are millions of people who are going to wake up on the resurrection morning, and angels are going to be right there to say, let me open the back door to my Cadillac. For the first time in millions of lives and experiences, I believe that God wants the best. I believe God does the best. And evidently the ride that you and I are on right now is the best that can be done and best that can be offered under the circumstances. And we can try down here all we want to change the circumstances, but let me say this from personal experience, if God doesn't change the circumstances, it doesn't work. I'm just a southern boy. I was told in seminary by one of my professors, a voice and speech therapist, that the reason you boys, and all of us were from the South, the reason you boys are in this class today is because you're all from the South, and I'm supposed to teach you how to speak properly. That was a real morale booster. You know? And this lady was very sincere. I mean, she was not smiling. She said, people in the South speak with mush in their mouth. Now, that was the painful truth. I never felt so poor in all my life as I did in that moment. The reason you're here is so I can straighten you out. And so I had a sense of worthlessness. And those memories were passing through when Joe Cruz of Amazing Facts, north of the Mason-Dixon line, said, we want you to come and become an evangelist for Amazing Facts. And my first thought was, as long as I preach south of the Mason-Dixon line, I'm okay. I'm okay. And the first place they sent me was to Ohio. Uh-oh. The second place Amazing Facts sent me was to Maryland. Uh-oh. I literally felt as though nobody's going to listen to me. No one's going to listen to me. They're going to hear my southern lingo, and they're not going to hear the message. That I really wrestled with that. But strange things went on in these evangelistic meetings. Strange things. No one ever came up to me in any one of these meetings and said, you're from the South, aren't you? No one ever said that. It was shortly after that that God threw all the doors wide open for me to travel and speak to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of churches and congregations and hundreds of thousands of people. And no one ever came to me, never once, no one ever came to me and said, you're from the South, I can't understand anything you're saying. Never happened. I have had, this is no exaggeration, I have had thousands of people come to me in my seminars through the years and say, you know, a lot of folk we hear, but we can understand you. You have to experience Andrews University. That's where the professor said, the reason you're here in this class today is so I can straighten you out. And the call and invitation came for me to speak in Pioneer Memorial Church at Andrews University, to standing room only. They had 6 pastors, 6. And the number 1 pastor, he was the head shepherd. He came and sat on the platform with me. That weekend I was to speak at Andrews. He came and sat with me on the platform. I sat beside him. I could have been placed over to sit by a lesser pastor. He looked at me when it was my turn to speak. He looked at me and he said, it's your turn. God be with you. You think it was not a humbling experience to stand up there in that church, and it was packed down the walls. Down the walls. It was packed. We had 25, 26, 27 decisions for baptism and rebaptism at Pioneer Memorial Church. And the head pastor came to me at the end of the meetings. And he said, "Brother, God is with you." That's a long way from a mouthful of mush. It's a long way. And what did I recognize? That God alone and only God can do. You cannot unlearn Southern lingo in a 6-hour class at Andrews University. You can't do it. And so my personal testimony and witness is this, that in 1956 I rode in my first Cadillac. And since then, for 36 years plus, I have been riding in a Cadillac. So Grady Sharp said, "You're riding with me." That's what God said to me. "You're riding with me." I was coming up I-65 the first time he told me that. Spoke out loud to me, "You're going the wrong way, man." That's all he said. There are spiritual lessons to be learned in a Cadillac. Father in heaven, every person here understands what we're saying, trying to share. Life down here is no Cadillac ride. It wasn't for Jesus. And the servant, he said, is not better than his master. So there are bumps, and there are hurts, and there are pains. And sometimes we just have to hoof it. Sometimes we just have to walk. Sometimes everything that can go broke goes broke. But what we need to know is, if we're walking along the road, you're walking with us. Just take the scales away from our eyes and help us to see what his own disciples could not see. Help us to understand that there's a better ride coming. There's a better day, a better time, a better way, a better place, a better meal coming. And every day that passes, we are nearer that day. We are nearer that ride. And I just ask you to bless every one of us. Doesn't matter if we're born north or south of the Mason-Dixon line. Doesn't matter if we're born east or west. It doesn't matter. You know who we are, and you still love us. Thank you for being in tune with the desires of our hearts. We have loved ones and friends that need prayer, and we could call names, but you know everyone and every need, everything that heaven can do and will be done. We believe that. We believe that everything you do is the best. And so we take the ride with you today in Jesus' name. Amen.